Okay, we're back. Um, Thank you all for coming back. Jesus. Okay. So don't try to live stream live on YouTube, opening Photoshop and Maya and everything at the same time. It will fry your computer apparently. In any case, let me reopen Maya. I did make the quick texture that I wanted to make, so before I started streaming. So I made this ugly thing, but it will fully showcase what I'm talking about in a good way. Um, okay. Jens, have you seen Dream's face reveal? No, I have no idea what you're talking about. Mm. I could get a Beast PC if OS would buy me one, then sure. Yes, the orange gradient. It's purely showcase. Okay. Certified gradient mode. I had no idea that I didn't expect Photoshop to actually lag out the entire system. I will have to find a solution for that when I'm starting to showcase actual texturing to you guys. Um, oh yeah, I mean, this is just an i5 processor with like a 2060, 2050 RTX card, so graphics wise no problem, but the i5 I think it's not handling all this stuff in a good way. Um, Little question about the three props. Is it a must-use template? No. So for the three for the milestone now, nah, it doesn't matter. Just make sure for the five props when you actually hand in on the Q week that you use the template then Fleur. Okay. Just prop flying some chicken after it. I'm actually vegetarian, Yannick, so no. Um I had a question before the CPU died. Is it okay to use things like tiling UVs and trim sheet workflow for the props and diorama if you know how to apply it? So, Jonne, for now, so for the five props, everything will be unique mostly, but you can use, if you already know how trim texture and stuff work, you can definitely use it. But we will see all that stuff after the actual Q week. So, and then for the house and everything like that, tiling textures will be a must and trim textures as well. But everything for most people, this is the first time that they ever see an unwrap and how texturing works. So the brain is already frying then. But tiling texture and everything, if you already know how it works, you can definitely use it. But for all the rest, just use unique textures, which we're focused on right now. Uh, I think I have 8 or 16 gigs of RAM. I hope I have 16. I have to check. RTX card handle the stream. Oh, that's actually a good idea, Mr. Boo. I'll look into that. Thanks. Okay. Okay, see that most people have came back. Tech question, what's the max site poly count for a simple cylinder? MVST, it totally depends on how big the thing is. For example, let's say you make a Coca-Cola, let's say you make a pencil, right? You would use, that is something very, very small. You think you use about five sides, for example. Like if you make a Coca-Cola can, you would use like six. If you make a barrel, you can use like 8 to 12. If you make a water reservoir tank, which is huge, you'd probably use something like 24, 32. So it depends on how big something is, how many sides you will give it. So the smaller, the less, the bigger, the more. Okay? Jens, you have 16. Yes, Jens. You will Javer run this out and just say, yeah, you'll never run this out. I don't think so. Um, is it possible to receive feedback after this week on your three props? So next week is the Unwrap Festival, right? And then I've asked for an extra theory stream, and in that theory I'll be giving fully feedback. So that'll be 2 hours of English and Dutch classes together, in which we'll go over. I'll just ask you guys to hand in your files, and I'll just pick out a few and just for 2 hours, I'll be giving feedback. Okay, so, and I'll see how far I can get. But a lot of feedback is most of the times applied to everybody as well. Okay. When handing in our profiles, do we hand in the exported selection of the actual? So Adre, for the actual Maya file, you need to hand in, yeah. And on Sketchfab, there you'll see your FBX file. So you don't need to upload your FBX file. That's perfectly fine. Just your Maya file. you have VX is purely for yourself, so no need to do that one. Will that be about the same time? No, Robin, it will be different, but it will be scheduled inside of your timetable. So you'll find it in there because other people give live streams and stuff as well, and I didn't get my usual Monday morning spot normally. I have a question about previous week. How do you fix the inside of your prop being black? That's Wolf of Silver. That name. Um, that's perfectly fine if it's black on the inside. If you want it double faced, then you actually need to model it toward the inside, and you can still change your. So for example, if I have my cube here, let me, for example, go back here. So if you have, for example, a black side, that's perfectly normal because you're actually looking towards the back side of your face. If you would actually want it to be double-sided, you probably do something like this instead. Um, Oh, yes, these two, this one and this one, bridge. There we go. Then you'd have like actual two-sided parts, okay? But for now, don't worry if it's just single-sided. Go with them in low poly if you don't need smooth. Okay, but let's get back into actual unwrapping. So, so again, I'm going to use this image as an indication because a lot of times, if you want to showcase, um, especially, let me go back into my UV editing mode. So in here, it sometimes can be difficult to see what you're actually doing. So what I wanted to showcase is the fact that your texture, so the thing that you're going to be making, is styling indefinitely. And I have a good, so this is where the actual gradient image comes in. Um, so um, a fee we actually know because you need to make it, you had to hand in your Maya file as well. Um, and also, it's just a good practice to learn. Imagine if you go into your internship and they work with Maya, and what you're going to do then. So just work with Maya. Um, in any case, let me apply a new material. We'll see stuff like this later on as well. I just quickly want to showcase something. Uh, File, image name. So I'm going to pick my beautiful gradient that I just made, theory, this one. Yeah, okay. So right now we can't see our texture. This is because I still need to enable it here. So you have this small icon here which says textured. So if I press this on, I can see my beautiful texture right now. Uh, if you enable this button and disable this one, you can also see it inside of your viewport, inside of the UV editor itself. Um, a lot of things. I have a question about the sneaky Blender users. In any case, um, so what do we have here, right? So right now, if I look at my unwrap, right, I can see that all my faces that I have selected are applied to my model, right? So I have uploaded this picture, and now I'm showing this actually on the model. And this is happening through the UV space, right? So imagine if I replace these squares. For example, if I do right-click, create automatic. What automatic does, it creates an automatic projection for you. Let me enable maybe my squares for a second here as well. There we go. So automatic projection, if as you can see on this side, it creates like on each face, or at least on each side of, like, for example, the viewcorp, so on the front view, top view, side view, on all sides, it's actually projecting um, a raycast, and it's actually calculating which faces are being shown there. And from that automatic unwrap, it gives us this result. So what it does, it now, since we're working with a cube, right, every face is shown separately. So if I showcase it right now in here, so for example, this is the result of my automatic unwrap, right? So imagine if these faces now also, so before, remember, maybe I can add a cube next to it as well. So this is a standard cube, and you can see there's a lot of white space, right? So there's a lot of unused space that I'm not using here. But on the other side now it's a lot bigger, right? So my faces are a lot bigger, so I can show more details on there as well. Obviously, I can't start stitching them back together right now because I don't have enough space. So a lot of times you will have to think about, okay, do my faces need to be stitched together or can they be separated as well, right? So the rule of thumb there is if it's okay that there's a seam, for example, let's say this is a wooden box, for example, then you would have seams in there anyway, right? So it's okay that these parts are all separated. But if there are, let's say this is that dies with the tips on it, then you could like combine them together as well. We will get him to hate Blender. Let's rather pursue him to use it instead. We will probably switch to Blender when, like, eventually in the future, but for now it's still actually Maya. But what I wanted to show with this beautiful gradient is the fact that this tiles indefinitely. So if I would rescale this, let me go back a little bit before I did the automatic unwrap. Yeah, Control Z. Yeah, and like here, there we go. So if I scale this bigger a lot of times, for example, like something like this, you now see that my you can now see, so we have our 0 to 1 space, remember, something like this. And now you can see that it's been shown multiple times. So this gradient, so this small square, there's like a million of them next to it. Okay, now this tool is bugging out, yeah. Um, so this small square is actually being shown here as well, here as well. So this 0 to 1 then also equals a 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and so further on. So in each direction, it's actually always styling. And since we are working with a unique texture, this means that the texture that we're making is purely made for this one. We always want to keep our image fully contained, or at least our unwrap fully contained in our 0 to 1 space. So this is super important for now, but we'll see more stuff about that later. Maya has the option to overlap UV similar. Yeah, it does. So, so yeah, indeed, Julio, we will see how actual, if you mirror stuff and you, for example, have a car, it's on the same thing on the left side and on the right side, we will like place them on top of each other. So when you're actually going to use models, unwrap some actual models, it's going to be easier to show than just some random cubes and stuff. Let me don't save this one. Yeah. So this is, for example, a example of an actual unwrap, right? It's a lot better to explain it this way. Um, so as you can see here, this is a very nicely fully packed object, right? Let me show it like this. There we go. So in here, the idea is again to make sure that also everything is kind of the same scale that the squares that you see on top of it, right? So you can also see how tightly packed everything is, and that's also important because if you go back, I don't have the slides open anymore. Mhm. Pum, 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 pum. So you can see, like I said, that all the basic models come with a basic unwrap as well, right? Um, but a lot of times we have a lot of white space that we need to fill in. Okay, yeah, this is where I'm going to. So what you're going to do is when you're going to be unwrapping all your models and like placing them around, you'll always need to think about it a little bit like playing Tetris. So we're going to try to fit in everything as nicely and cleanly as possible together to have a good fit, right? And a good example, for example, here is you can see that almost there are almost no unused parts left anymore, right? So obviously you will never be able to fill it in completely, right? We will always leave a little bit of space between them as well. Um, and we will also move parts that are on top of each other. So for example, here I have this part. Let me disable that one again. Yeah. Wait, what is this? Yeah. Okay. Parts that are less important that we want to showcase two times on the same thing, we will also move it one unit because it's the same texture anyway. But let's just start with unwrapping some things. That will be a lot easier. So imagine that I want to unwrap this box, um, this one, and let's start from a automatic, something like this. So each face right here is now separated from the other ones, right? So I have a part here that I can move. So what you can do is we want to, for example, stitch these things together. So we can select one edge. If you go into your edge mode, you can select one edge. And you can hold shift right click and sew. Oh, no, not that one. And stitch together. When you stitch together, you can see that before. So this was a UV island and this one is a UV island as well. So two sides. I actually want to move this part towards the other one. So the thing is, in Maya, so if you, or just in 3D in general, if you look at the UV in the UV editor, we can see we have two edges for the same edge inside of our editor. So the thing right here is, right now is that actually, remember, these are all faces, so they all have their own vertices, their own edges, right? But they're still connected together, right? So in here we have only one edge, and if I move this edge, the entire object gets changed, right? But in here, in our UV space, we can actually have two edges, which are still from the same part. So in this case, what I would want to do, I would want to stitch them together, so it actually moves better. And to show what the result is of that, um, I can use the beautiful gradient again. So it's actually better to show it that way as well. So the gradient already comes in handy. So let me create a new material real quick, Lambert. So materials and stuff, we'll be talking about that later as well. It's just easier this way to show file image, which was the template. Yes, this one. If you do manage to fill it, literally the entire space probably means you added too much seams and the model is very prone to big issue. Yeah, I see Julio already has some experience. Um, yeah. Oh, transparency. Ah, no, crap, wrong one. Break connection. It's the color. Yes, so that's the one that we want. There we go. So if I would just so if I do a automatic, let's just start from this again, and disable that one. So right now what we see actually, since we have all separated seams, right? So as you can see here, nothing is connected together. This also means if I look at the end result of my box here, right? You can see that my gradient, it's not really clean, right? It gets cut off. There's not like a smooth transition between there. So this is actually where the connection part comes in handy. So remember, so these are all separated faces. So let's maybe place them a bit more in order, right? So this is the front side. So this is my most important one. There we go. This one is my left side, so you can move it there, for example. This one is that side to that side as well. And something interesting is already happening here too. So even though these, let me maybe place it on top of the gradient, it'll be easier to see. So even though these are like, for example, so this is, let's say this is one, right? This is one, this is two, and this is two. So even though they're placed next to each other, for some reason you can see that the gradient is flipped, right? This means because of the fact that this face is actually rotated, right? So this, oftentimes if you're unwrapping and you use like something like a gradient here, for example, it's a really good showcase to see if faces are rotated or not. So that's also something that can happen. So to fix this, you could say like, okay, I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees, for example, and now it's like a smooth transition, right? But what can guarantee that you have the best transition as all is instead of like placing it close next to each other, is actually combining and stitching it together. So if I select one edge, you can see that the other one gets selected as well. Because actually, remember, like I just said, they are actually the same edge inside of my viewport. So if I would stitch them here, stitch together, now I have a different color line as well. So you can see I have a thick white line and I have a blue line. So the difference between those two is that the blue line is a combined edge. So these are together as and one. And this one, so the white line is something we call a seam. So a seam is somewhere, if you remember the printed piece of paper, for example, for the dice, right? If you would cut it out around the border, that's a seam, and the parts in between are just normal edges, right? So this guarantees that we have a very smooth transition. No matter where I place this now, I will still have a perfect transition. This is because now this is one UV shell, and a UV shell is actually is a is one of the parts you can select in the marking menu, right? So we have our faces, we have our shells, we have our edges, we have vertices, and we have UV, which is something different still as well, right? 9 degree turns it 180. Did I do it wrong? Um, why aren't your past streams automatically added to the video section of the channel? You can access them on Leho. All of the streams are put on Leho. Um, so we have, so ideally, right, we can see that we still have a lot more seams than before, right? So what I can do now is, for example, I can stitch these together as well. So shift right click, stitch together. And now I have a smooth transition on that part as well. Then you can say, ah, I still have one on the other side as well. Let's stitch these one together. It's two, so edge, stitch together. There we go. Let me quickly unfold this. Yeah. So right now, if I move this around and I look, I have a very, very clean transition, right? So it's very nice to see. And I have one on the top as well. So maybe, so since this is my front one and I've been connecting everything to this one, it's a good idea to maybe stitch that one in there as well. So if I go to my object mode, I now have a very clean gradient on top of it. But if I look, for example, let's maybe move this one a bit more like this, so we have a better view. You can also see that there's some sort of a problem, right? My gradient, it stops here and it doesn't follow further along. Same thing with, for example, on the sides here. So it's not perfect. And that's also normal. I mean, if I would want to stitch, for example, these two sides together, because actually, remember, they are one part, but if I want to place it open, you need to have a seam somewhere, right? Because if I would want to combine these two together, which you can definitely do, let me maybe move it a bit. If I would stitch these together, you get something weird. So what happened now is behind the back. So if let me place it for a second on this tool. Um, so right now this tool is actually super handy. So the UV distortion, so this cube here shows you how much distortion there is in your model. So for example, if I'd go, so right now everything is very clean, it's purely white. But if I would, for example, move this one, you start to see that my whole thing starts to look very, very bad. Same thing as well with, for example, if I look at my V space right now, you can start to see my clean checker pattern gets fully stretched. So that's a very, very bad thing. So we will always try to keep it as white as possible inside of the UV distortion mode, because in there, if we start to have these red or blue colors, it means that there's some distortion in there. Sometimes there's no different way. For example, if you look at something like a actual sphere, you see that there's a lot of distortion in there. But that's also normal because of the fact that it's a rounded part and it's actually bending in unnatural ways. So sometimes it's just the way it is and there's nothing that you can do about it. But if we can avoid it, for example, in this case, so let me do Control it for a second. Yeah. So here, if we just keep these as separated edges, right, and we don't stitch them together, we don't have any issues, right? And if in any case I do want to have like my smooth gradient transition between the two, then I would just texture it that this part looks the same as that part, and then that way I have no issues anymore. Okay. So this tool is really handy to check your like if it's bended or not, right? And in any case, we now have a very smooth transition, right? So this is a good start of an unwrap, okay? But as you can see as well, I still have a lot of empty space above. So what we would want to do then is we could add more items to it, right? So if I go back to my small scene here, I can see I have a few cylinders on top as well, right? So what I could do is I could add these actually to the other one as well. So let's have a look. The handy thing about Maya is, for example, if in the past if you worked with 3ds Max, for example, if you wanted multiple objects to share the same texture space, you would have to combine them together into one prop. But here, inside of Maya, we can actually select multiple props and show them on the same UV space anyway. So for example, I have my UV space here. I could then go to UV shell modes, select the other one that I don't need. So for example, I have this one, I have these two. Oh, maybe let's make it ourselves a bit easier by moving this up first of all. Let's move this up a bit. Because if I select them now together, it's easier to select them, right? Something to note here as well is this. So let me maybe let's select this one and that one and isolate it. So remember you have this small button, isolate select, which is super handy if you have like a small scene with a lot of stuff in there. So I'm just going to isolate these two. And now something interesting is happening as well. So this is actually a good showcase of texture resolution difference. What I mean with this is if we look at the squares here, this is about like this is the resolution that we're working on. So this would be, for example, 1 pixel, right? If you look at the other one, so this small can on top, it's a lot smaller, right? So this means on this tall, big surface, let's say I have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, let's say about 10 pixels, sort of speaking, right? For something that's even smaller, I would have more pixels. So this would look more crisp and sharper than the big one. So that's obviously a big no-go, right? Ideally, we would want to keep this the same. Um, so this cylinder, right here, this already had like a basic unwrap. Maybe I should take the one that's this one. It's easier to show. Let's move this one up. All right. So what we want to do is actually want to make sure that the resolution is the same, right? So we can see the bigger I scale this, the more resolution I would be able to show on it, right? But keep in mind that we need to keep working between our 0 to 1 space, right? So a 0 to 1 space. And right now we have actually something else that we can show, which is this one. No, not that one. Yeah, this one. So we have a lot of different modes. Remember, this one was to show the distortion. That one is to show overlapping UVs. So what this means is, for example, you can see we have two shades of blue here, right? So I have this shade and that shade. And this one is a lot darker. So this means that there's actually two UV shells stacked on top of each other. And in this case, right here, right now, this is a bad thing, right? Because I don't want to show the same gradient. Maybe yeah. Let me add this gradient to this one as well. Add existing material, number two. There we go. Oh. So if we look at our object right now, we can see that we have where our gradient was here shown over the full image, like over the full model, which is a very tall thing. It's now also shown on the same small one like there, and that's not really normal. So what you would want to do instead is make sure that these squares are the same. So how can we do this? Let me first move this one up a bit. Right. I can select one face, so the top one, for example, and I can go to my transform. So if you open up, so you have your UV toolkit here, you have the transform on the side. Let me open this one up. And you scroll down a bit, they have something which is called texel density. So the way that we'll be using it now is not fully correct, but it's the easiest way to explaining and showing how it works. So if I press on get, it will give me a number that says how many pixels per unit is being shown, right? So right now, this on this phase, this is something like 3.1. If I select, for example, that one and I get it, it's 24. So it's a lot bigger, this number. So what we can do here is we can get the size of this face, right? So this is inside of the world scale, how big something is and how much pixels it needs to show in there, right? So I can select my actual, yep, let me select these two again. I can select my faces here of my small cylinder on top. Imagine that this is a Coca-Cola can and the thing underneath it is like a vending machine or something, right? I can put it to set and it will make it a lot smaller. So it went from this big to something very small, right? Let me maybe move it a bit closer together as well. So now we can see that the scale is back to 1 to 1. So one square here, right? So from our checkered pattern is the same scale like on this one as well. So now they're equally as big. So this is actually scale-wise. Remember, it's not only important that your objects inside of your UV editor are the same scale, but it's also important that they're inside of our UV editor is also the same scale. So did I say two times the same thing? So So here it needs to be the correct scale as this is a Coca-Cola can and this is, for example, a vending machine, then this is a lot smaller, obviously, than the other thing. Then it makes sense that in our UV space it's the same thing, right? So this shows you how small this is compared to each other. So right now I would show equal amount of detail basically on these two objects. So if you would compare it then with the other one again, so let me take on the other Coca-Cola can, the soda can for example as well, right? See how much smaller it is. So this was how it was before, and this one was how it is together. So ideally we will try to do this for most props, right? Um, So in this case, you could say like, okay, if I would combine this together into one texture, this could, again, vending machine. This could be, for example, a Coca-Cola can, something like Fanta or Sprite or whatever, Canada Dry. Um, then you'd also make sure that this one, so the one next to it, is also the same size. So you do just the same thing again, and the pixel density, you would just set it to the correct size. So for example here, if I set this, there we go, then I have my new unwrap as well, right? Then I just need to apply the same material to it. Number two, there we go. Okay. So it's just important when things are sharing the same UV space that the sizes are equal. Right? Something important to note as well, for example, if you look at something like this is how it looks normally when you're starting to model something and you're just, so again, these are just a cylinder and a cube, right? So it has a nice normal unwrap to begin with. But like, let's say you're working with something like a bench. Let me save this scene real quick in case it crashes. Mm, There we go. So imagine you're working on your model and you're just modeling away, like this is a good example. You can also see here that it accidentally got triangulated. So this means, for example, here we can see even on flat faces that it actually made that, remember that invisible edge, right? This object got triangulated. Um, or maybe I should pick another one then. Maybe you can make yeah, this one is maybe a better example. So imagine you have like this treasure chest, right? Um, and sometimes it can happen that you, for example, you select a model. So you select a model and you can't see your unwrap. So it's like completely black. This can happen if this happens, for example, if you delete your unwrap. So you can actually delete it. So the easiest way to get it back is just select your model, hold the right mouse button inside of your UV editor. Let me maybe make this a bit more this way. Yes. Hold right click, create, for example, automatic, and it gives you something like this. So something to note as well is with the automatic, like I showed you before, so this is like more on an actual model, right? So again, it raycasts from different views and it just gives us the result as is, right? So a lot of times this could be a good starting point because now I have all my separate faces and now I could start sewing together. So what I could do here, for example, so now at least we can see our squares on top of it again. We can see there's a little bit of stretching in there. But actually it's a solid foundation to start from. One thing I do want to point out though is, for example, these handles, right, that you can see on the left side and on the right side. Maybe let's make a copy out of this. There we go. We will never really see it at the same time. Let me go for quickly to modeling toolkit, change the rotation. There we go. It's better to work that way. There we go. There we go. Export. UV editing. Yeah. So also when you are unwrapping and stuff, make sure that your model is like cleanly on the center and not just somewhere floating in space with like a rotation on top of it. Um, this is to explain the next step. So let me just isolate this one, for example. Yeah. Because what's actually happening, for example, on the right side, on the left side, we have this handle on which you like can pick up the box, right? But we will never see those at the same time, right? Because if I place my camera like this, I see, for example, this one. If I rotate, I see this one, and all the way back. So what I can do here actually is I actually only need to unwrap one of them, and then I can mirror it to the other side as well. So this will save you like a lot of work if you work smart in that regard, right? So we can do that a bit later. So here I can maybe let's add our gradient material to it as well, so we can have a good view of what's actually happening. Existing Lambert 2. Let me maybe rename the Lambert 2 as well to M underscore value, M underscore gradient. There we go. Okay. So what this all is we will explain this when we start texturing and stuff, right? Right now I'm focusing on the unwrapping part. So if we look at our model right now, we can see so our gradient is all over the place, right? There's nothing really clean happening in there. Um, so we need to fix that. So we do the same thing as before. Pom, 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 pom. Yeah, this one. So we do the same thing. We would take, for example, this is my front face, so this is my most important one. Oh, why? Holy shit, man. Oh, my chat only updated now. I see there's like a lot of things, questions happening. I already thought it was stranger when the things. Text entity edits to UV, texture, resolution, texture. Size of the UV won't change. Use quality painting on top of it. So I just see the questions popping up now. YouTube, for some reason, didn't update it, the questions. Okay, how can you disconnect the edges back? Can you cut the texture? Technically, cut the mesh and texture. Fair enough. Thanks. The resolution below. Yeah, okay, let's just continue. So this is my front face. You can already see for the first step as well that it's actually rotated. So in this view, it's actually horizontal, and this one is vertical. So we would actually start with rotating this in the correct axis as well. To know which is, for example, the bottom and which is the top side, I quickly usually just select one edge. For example, like this, I select this one, and now I know it's like the bottom one. So I can rotate this one 90 degrees. You can also do this quickly by going into your UV toolkit, and the tools is like a quick rotate one as well. Um, is there a way to just select where you want to seams rather than to stitch every? Yes, Sana, I'll be showing that and like after this one. So indeed, there's like a faster way than doing this. So right now we could start, for example, stitching these things together, right? So I'm moving, I'm stitching them together. This way I'm creating, remember that nice gradient. Um, there we go. Then I would say like, okay, let me add the top part to it as well. Stitch together. So here's something interesting happening as well. A lot of times we see this. For example, like now, what's happening, I've stitched this together, and this is actually still one part, right? So this is now an empty, shallow, hollow place, right? There's nothing really useful there. So what you can do instead is, instead of having this as one part, it would make more sense that I would cut this open and that I would stitch these parts to my actual model. That way I lose a lot less space. Um, and it will be easier to texture it as well. So what I can do now is I can break these separate together. So if I right click, so let's say I want this to be a separate UV shell, I can shift right click, create UV shell, and then I can move it separately. So this one, face, create UV shell, and now these are separated parts. So I can stitch this together. There we go, stitch together, stitch together. So if we look at the result now as well, we can already start to see that our bottom part is a lot cleaner, right? Okay. Then we can also have the other parts as well. For example, the inside of the box. Let me pick this one, rotate this, which is the top side. This is the top side, so I need to rotate it that way. So now this is my top edge. Stitch together, stitch together, stitch together. There you go. Is there a way to just select? Yeah. So a UV shell, sleep tight, is just one island. So for example, this part is a UV shell. So if I go into face mode, I can select just one face. If I go to edge mode, I can select an edge. But if I want to select this entire piece at once, this is called a UV shell. right? So what will eventually happen is, so our model, even though, for example, here this is one model, right? We will eventually have a lot of UV shells. So we will break it up into separated pieces. So for example, this is UV shell mode. If I select it, I select my UV shells, right? So this is actually the easiest way then to place them together. So imagine that I'm done with my unwrap, which is definitely not the case, right? I would eventually want them all to fit inside of this space. So what I could do then is I can select all my faces, hold right mouse button. Yeah, it's just easier to do it in UV Toolkit. If I go into my UV Toolkit, so remember on the right side you will have your UV Toolkit, and you scroll down a bit, you have Arrange and Layout. In there, you also have the Layout button. So imagine that you're working and like you have all your things all over the place, like you're just stitching them together, making all your nice UV shells. You could select everything and press on Layout. So what layout will do, it will take everything and it will jam them together inside of a 0 to 1 space. But it's not perfect, right? So this is a good start, but it's by far not perfect. Because it will also rotate certain things in the weird angles, which is super weird, um, and just fully not optimized. But it's a good way to start, right? Because for example, this is already bad as well. Here you can see what the UV the layout did. It actually placed some textures or some models on top of each other. So this is a very, very bad thing. Why? Because this face right here, right now, so that one, which one I have selected, is sharing the same pixels as that one. So imagine if there's like a dirt stain on that part, for example, it's also being shown on this part as well. So layout is under, so you have your UV toolkit, you have your arrange and layout at the bottom tab, and then you have your layout. So again, layout is never final, okay? A lot of times you see people just pressing layout and calling it done. That's not the case, okay? Always fix it manually after as well. Um, this is just to quickly jam everything together as well, okay? And this is also the unwrap is not by far good. What I want to show as well is, so remember, so for example, this was the create automatic, right? So it gave me the it gave me this as a result. So remember, it projected it around the entire thing. But there's actually a faster way of unwrapping, and that's actually the one that I really like to work with. Um, yes, like Julio says, trust yourself more than you trust Maya. I'm going to show you a different way of unwrapping that, in my opinion, goes a lot faster if you fully understand what you're doing. So instead of working with the automatic unwrap, so if we go back, for example, to the automatic unwrap, let's maybe make a copy out of this just to show it will be easier. There we go. So, so remember, if I select everything, hold Shift right click, and I start with an automatic one, this is the result, right? So again, it's a good way to start, but now all my pieces are all separated and I need to stitch everything manually back together. A faster way of working, but you will need a little bit of time to wrap your head around this, is if I start from one part and I just say to Maya, I select where my seams will be and I will let it open it by itself. So for example, let's start simple with, for example, this part. So if I look at this cube, let me maybe move this up a little bit. If I think about it, what will be the eventually the unwrap? It will probably be something like this, right? So I have my let me so I have my mid part there, right? Will have my side parts to the side, right? So this will be that part. I will also have on the side view, I will have this one as well. Then I will probably have my another big one there and my So this will probably be the unwrap of this small box, right? So remember, if you would cut it out on a piece of paper and you want to fold it back together, something like this would be the result. So instead of working with the automatic one, which just gives you sometimes a piece of junk to work with, right? So this is garbage to start from. Um, I could start with something different. This is camera based. So what this camera based does, it's literally what the word says. So I'm going to make a projection from my camera, right? So if I hold right click, I create camera based. This will, yeah, this will fuck up your scaling, but you can fix it afterwards anyway. So what I have now, right, is um, a camera base, and I can also see that it's fully overlapping, and this is it's really bad, right? But it's a good start, and I'll explain why. So I can see that there's a lot of stretching in there, but what I can do now is I can go into my edge mode, and I can tell Maya, okay, I'm going to say where the seams need to be, right? So for example here, so I know that this is, for example, my top face, right? So I can say to Maya, okay, I will want, so remember what we just draw, right? So I remember that something like this is the end result that we're going towards, right? I'm just quickly drawing it. So what I'm going to say to Maya is I'm going to say to Maya, okay, I actually want that these edges will need to be seams, right? So what I can do is I can select those edges in here, and then I will convert them to seams, and I will say to Maya, okay, I just want you to unfold this for me, right? So I can go into my edge mode, I select one edge, so remember what I just have drawn, right? So these corner pieces will need to be separated, these as well, right? And now if I, for example, if I cut this, you will see that the color will change as well. So if I go back, I now have white lines and I have blue lines. Remember, the blue lines will stick together, and the white lines will be separated from each other. Then I can select this part and I can say unfold, unfold. And then I get the result that I asked for, right? So remember, I I say to Maya, here is where I want you to cut it open, and then I unfold it. So if you shift right click, you can go to unfold, unfold, and it will literally unfold it for you, right? It's actually in the name. So this saves me a lot of time because if I go back to, for example, this example, so remember this is my start. This is what we had before. So I have my separated parts, um, in which I can say, let's maybe um, create UV shell, that this is a separate part, and we have these parts, and then I can say, okay, I actually want that piece to start from, and you already see that the shape actually is not the same as well, right? So this is a lot more rectangle, and this is a lot more square. So just from the start, from the beginning already, it's wrong, right? So we can see that there's stretching in there. When we would fix it in this way, we would still need to unfold it anyway. So if I unfold this, it will make it into the shape that it does. So unfold is a super strong and powerful tool inside of Maya, and I really really love it because it just works really really well. Um, so if I would unfold these faces, right, um, they will jump to their original size. So in here I would then start, okay, I need to stitch together, so stitch these together, stitch that one together, stitch that one together. So you see there was a lot more steps that I need to do to get the same result as I have here. So if I go back here, right? Remember, since this was used because of a camera-based projection, it started from one piece. I cut out the parts that I wanted, and then I just let it unfold for you. I see there's some questions. Sometimes my answer might seem to update camera basis faster to my instead of team by team. Yeah, so indeed, like Julia says, so camera base, it just gives you one part in which you can easily just cut away where you want it, and everything is nicely stitched together. And then you say, okay, I want a seam here, I want a seam there, and then you just unfold it, and it will open up for you. Um, In the work planner for next week, there are no classes. Yes. So next week there's Unwrap Festival. I was going to go over it a bit later. There's no lab classes, but there will be a theory stream, and the theory will be a feedback moment. Okay. In any case, so we have, for example, so we have now unwrapped this small piece, and we have one issue again. So we have two issues. First of all, we can see that the resolution is different. So my pixels here are a lot bigger than they are there. So that's the first thing they need to change. They need to make sure that this is the actual true size. And remember, we can do this by going, for example, to face mode. We go to transform. Then we go down a bit, transform to texel density. We can get this one. This time it's 3.0. We can then double click on this one, put it to set, set, and then poop, it jumped back to the true size. But now we have one more issue, is that it's still rotated. Um, and imagine that I want to place this perfectly straight, which you should always do, right? I can select my edge if I scroll down. So before we had the layout, we also have the orient shelves and orient to edges. So if I press my orient to edges here, for example, it will take that edge that was tilted and it will place it nicely flat and everything that is connected to it, right? So this is a very clean way of unwrapping, right? Um, I see some questions. Free time. Free time. Uh-huh. Exactly. um, how do you unstitch a seam? Okay. So, uh, unstitch a seam. Unstitch. For example, if you want this to be separated parts, is that what you mean, Leah? So if you, for example, said, oh, I prefer that this part was here instead, you can always just go into edge mode, shift right click, cut, and then you have a seam again. Um, uh, pop, 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 unstitch a seam. Okay, so now we did the camera based for this small piece, right? Imagine we would do the entire workflow for the chest. So let me speed run this a little bit so you can just see how the workflow would be. Can you cut seams in the viewport? No. So you can select them here, definitely. So that's what I'm going to showcase right now. So let me maybe just show this one. So imagine if you want to unwrap this entire thing, right? If you select everything, so this was, remember this was the automatic. It gave you a lot of separated parts. And let's say now we start from a create camera based. So you see that the result of the camera base is literally to where a camera is projected. For example, if I would do something like this instead, and I would start from here and I would do shift right click create uh, camera based, then I would get something like that, right? So the idea now is that we have a clean slate to start working from. The only seams that we see, so the white lines that we see, are those parts that are actually connected to nothing, right? All the rest is connected, and then we can start unfolding it by ourselves. So first thing that I usually do is I start by moving some pieces around so I have a clearer view. So if you go into either UV shell mode, you can select a shell, and then you can already have a nice view of, okay, what are the shells? What are all the separated pieces, right? So this is one part, this is another part, and then you would just go step by step and cleaning it up. So remember, let's start easy from, for example, this small box. What what would be the logical way of unwrapping this would be that we have our big piece at the front and then we have our smaller side pieces stitched on top of that, right? Right. So in here we have a lot of stretching, a lot of bad UV space, and we want to go to something like this. So this also means that my seams need to be here, right? Maybe let me go into a different color, green. So I need a seam here, and that seam will actually translate to that one there. Okay, then I will also need a seam here, and that one will translate to this one there. If I do place a seam here, that one will be that one. If I place a seam here, that one will be that one. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to select these edges. So again, this can be in your viewport, right? I can select them here. It corresponds to the same one anyway, right? Um, so for example, this one, this one, this one. But what you can also see is, so here I need to rotate my camera a lot of times to find the right seams. I can also just select them here inside of my UV editor. It's a lot easier. I don't need to rotate my camera or anything. Shift right click, cut. So with the cut tool, you actually create a seam. There we go. It changes the color as well. So remember, seam, seam, not a seam, right? And that's what we want. Because if I like go into my face mode, double click on it, I select UV shell. Shift right click, unfold, unfold. And then I have something nice as this. Then I can go into my edge mode, orient to edges, place it nice and straight. Next part, for example, I have this part. This one is a little bit more tricky because we have an annoying shape to work from, right? This is not just a clear box. So in here you can say like, okay, what could be a logical unwrap for this? I would definitely want to keep the top part as it is. So in this case, I would probably start by creating an edge here. So maybe also just to show what happens if you just unfold it as it is, it gives you something weird, right? So if you don't have stitches on the logical place and you unfold it, it does something like this. So this just makes it even worse than it was before, right? So if this is like your result, this means that it can't open properly. So you really need to make sure that where you place your seams, they're in a logical way, right? So let me do Control Z for a second. Is this actually still a face on the backside? No, it's empty. Okay, perfect. Um, so let's say maybe let's start by, and if you're not certain, you can still just break it up, right? So for example, now I've broken this up into separated parts, and this is a way that you can start as well, right? So you can think like, okay, so these are now all separated parts, unfold, unfold, then I have these kind of parts. I can then still orientate them to edges, so they're like more straight. There we go. So this is also a workflow. If you're not 100% certain, like, okay, how am I going to unfold this in a clean way? Just cut it open, and then you have separated parts to work with, right? It's a lot easier. Um, with a bottle, yeah, I'll showcase a cylinder in just a second. Um, and then here we can then just say, okay, stitch together, stitch together. There we go. Right. I'm going to do the inside. I'm not going to stitch that on top of there because otherwise I would have overlapping faces. So imagine if I would do stitch this one together as well. See, now I have faces which are overlapping. That's a bad thing. Then you could say like, but what if I move it all separated, right? Like this, stitch together, stitch together. Then I have even more overlapping faces. So in this case, I would just keep this as a separate part. I keep it, there we go, something like this. Right. So in that regard, you would just continue with the rest of your model. Um, and again, the more you do it, the better you will know what you're doing and the faster it will go. I separated these pieces by selecting, for example, this part is now connected to the rest. Um, you can do this by shift right click, create UV shell. So this will create a UV shell for me. And now this is one fully separated part. That's the easiest way of doing it. Um, so these are of course, then for the box you would just continue, right? So let me maybe start with cutting out the middle part, the inner piece as well, because this is a separate part anyway. So I would cut this, move the inner part separate, and then in here again you would start thinking about logical places, and like the more you do it, the easier this kind of stuff will become. Okay, but once you fully understand the power of like the unfold workflow, it can go like super fast. So for example, if I select this UV shell, I did it wrong. Control Z. Yeah. So for example, here what I would want to do is I would want to cut this open like this. Cut, double click, unfold, unfold. Oh, I accidentally placed an edge too much. So this could be a part, this could be a part, and then we could still stitch them back together. There we go. But in this case, for example, here, I would actually keep the bottom part to a different one, because it's a bottom, so create UV shell. And in some cases, it's okay to make things smaller, just not bigger. So for example, um, the inside, you could make that, for example, a bit smaller if you show less detail in there. If, let's say there's like a lot of stuff inside of the box, then you could maybe make it a bit smaller to save some resolution, right? But in any case, that this workflow, um, it goes, once you get the hang of it, it goes super fast, um, because you don't need to do everything manually, right? So it does takes a little bit of getting used to, right? But super handy, especially when you work with things like tubes. Let me showcase this one. Oh, it's almost time already. So imagine you've modeled something like this, um, and you have a lot of tubes. Tubes normally are a big hassle to unwrap, unless you use the unfold tool. I see a question. How do you restore the original size if you made it smaller? To the same thing, Wolf, to the texel density. So for example, if you made something smaller and you want to get it back to the same resolution as before, so now we can see, for example, before where I had, for example, more resolution and less on the other one. So you can see that here I would have less resolution than here because I just have uh, I don't have as much of the checker pattern that I can see. You could say get and then set, and then it just goes back. I just realized that my layout button is behind my camera. Wait, wait. Um, no. Yeah, okay. So remember before when I was talking about the layout button, I just realized that it's behind my camera. So we have the arrange and layout, and there you have the layout, right? And you also have the orient to edges. So if this was, for example, rotated in a strange way, you can select your edge, go to orient to edges, and it will make it nice and straight for you. And so let's say, imagine that I'm ready with unfolding, but this is obviously not the case, right? Under the arrange and layout, you have the layout button as a start. So you can press this one, and then you would start moving it around manually as well, the way that you would like it to be. And if there's nothing to get from, there will always be something to get from, right? Um, does less resolution, small UV give more performance, less render time? Well, that's something which I'm going to show right now. Actually, I only have a few more minutes left. Really, really fast. If you want to unfold, for example, something like a tube, so let's say I have this part, I'm just going to show really, really quickly because we're almost at the end of the time. Uh, so imagine you have a tube. Let me maybe start again from a camera projection. So I'm going to start from a shift right click, create uh, camera based, right? So I have my cylinder here, right? What you want to do now is, so when you're creating your seams, you always want to place it somewhere you will see it as least as possible. So for example, if this is the front of my model, I will place my seam at the back, right? So this is where you will open up your model. So that seam, it will be the most difficult to get rid of it. So in this case, I would select the, if I would select this seam, there we go. Let me maybe start off with cutting away these faces, create UV shell, and now I would select this edge, oh, this edge, and then the one that's connected to it, which is done in the back. Cut it, there we go. Double click on it, unfold, unfold, and that way you can get a really, really clean result of a something like here. You can see it's like it's a bended tube. Sorry. So a bended tube. If we would do this with the automatic, so imagine like if I would start this one with create automatic, you get all these separated parts, and if I would then start stitching them together, you get like all these separated pieces, and it's super annoying. But with the unfold, it goes super, super quick, and so unfold is the way to go, right? Okay, I see that there's some more questions. Mm, like Lewis, yes, yes. So indeed, um, some parts that you can't really see, we will give them less resolution, so will scale them smaller. But all the parts that are visible inside of the normal viewport, so like we can see here, ideally we would give them all the same resolution, right? So like for example this box here, if this box had a bottom part, we would give that one less resolution. Unless it, for example, would be turned on its side and that you could see the bottom of it, then we would give it the same resolution as well. So it's super dependent on how your prop is going to be used. But for example, if this was, remember, the vending machine and it always stays on top, the best thing is just to delete that face. But imagine if it would get like knocked over, for example, in a game, then you would have to have a bottom face in there anyway. Okay. Yeah, Sky, bro. It's not like I actually want to do that. Um, mhm. So this is just a small introduction to unwrapping. There's like a lot more things to cover there, but we'll see more about it in next week's lab classes and stuff like that as well. It's also something you just need to practice. Um, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. So the goal eventually is to create nice, clean unwraps like this, and then we will talk more about like moving parts to another part the other week. Okay. Oh yeah, if you then would want to um, next week lab class, the week after that. So after the unwrap festival, we will start unwrapping and so we'll do a small exercise today as well, like this week as well in the lab class, but we'll go more in depth, more in later classes. Okay. Something important as well, if you then want to export it, you could create a UV snapshot, but you can read all about that inside of the theory slides, the resolution that we're going to work with. Um, One more thing quickly as well is so what we're going to be using these unwraps for is obviously for creating a texture then, right? So that we know where we need to store what information, because of course this, for example, is just a gradient, so we don't really do a lot with it. But if we look, for example, at a really quick example, let's say 3D unwrap. So the idea will be, for example, here, if we look at it, so if we make our unwrap, that we then know where to, if you look, for example, at the teeth, that we need to know where we can draw it on, right? So this white thing on top that we see is actually the unwrap that we did right now. And then in Photoshop, you would add color and like information to it, right? That you know where it will be shown on the actual model. So if I would, for example, export this one, so we have a small camera button here. Yes, yes, Robert, they will be online right after the theory stream. So if I put here on the UV snapshot, then you need to change some settings. So we need 2024 and 1024. It's going to be a PNG file. Let's change the edge colors to maybe black, for example, now. Browse desktop. Oh, what is this file name? Let's just put it really quickly there. Save, apply, or maybe let's make this green instead. It will be easier to see. There we go. So imagine that this is our UV unwrap. Now you can see that this is the result. And we will use that then inside of Photoshop. I'm not going to open it right now, otherwise my stream will probably crash again. So we would open this then inside of Photoshop, and then we would know, okay, where do we need to place certain details and materials and all that kind of stuff. Okay. Um, Something to know about texture resolution is so we'll always be working with powers of 2 in each dimension. This means that a texture, the lowest one is 1 on 1, then 2 by 2. But ideally, we will always be working on textures from, and at least in low poly in this semester, with textures from 512 on 512 to 1K 24. So here, if you look at this one, for example, this also shows the resolution that we'll be mostly of all be working with. No, Matteo, we'll not be working with substance, just Photoshop. So imagine that this is the resolution that we're working on, so 1024 pixels on 1024 pixels. So this is a already rather large image that would fit four 512 and 16 times 256. So ideally, what you need to know is that texture resolutions are expensive because each pixel has its information in it, right? Wait, so believe it or not, Substance does a bunch of stuff we believe or if you really got the grasp on it. Yeah, so the reason that we use Photoshop indeed is because of the fact that we first want you to fully understand how layers work, how masks work, how all that kind of stuff works, that you fully understand what's happening, and then Substance will do that stuff for us. We will use textures, images from the internet that we just download or make ourselves, but texturing is for another theory class. Don't worry, we'll be going much more in depth then. I just wanted to showcase that textures are super expensive because, like for example, now if you look at a 500 by 512 picture, that actually means that we have, like just like it says, 512 pixels on this side and on the other side. So in total, one image of a 512 resolution has 226 262,000 pixels on it, right? Not only does that, for example, mean one picture is one color, that color is actually made up out of at least three channels as well. So you can read up more in depth here as well. I just want to let you know how expensive textures are because like one 512 texture needs at least 786,000 values to know where to show what pixel, right? Um, but yeah, unfortunately I'm out of time to explain this in a clean way. You can just read it, and I read it. I written it out yesterday, so it's easier to understand. Um, is there a texturing feature in my? No, we're not. So everything textures will be done in Photoshop. Okay, one more thing before we round up. Um, So the next milestone, so remember for this week, the milestone for your lab classes are the three, the three simple props. So this one. So this needs to be handed in this week before the start of your lab class. So you can just read about it as well. So don't forget to use your upload your Sketchfab as well, and then the three props. And then for the next milestone, which is after the unwrap week, so in week 5, so we're now in week 3. We ask you to model, um, let me open this up. I will open it in just a minute. We will ask you to model like two more hard props as well, and then combine everything into one small scene and just upload it too. So don't worry, just everything is written out. I'm going to open it up right now and the theory 2. There we go. So let me publish this, then draw this as well. There we go. In any case, let's wrap up for today. So there was a lot of information given. Don't worry if you weren't able to follow along with everything. Just read the PDF file with the theory. If you have any question about this, you can always ask them during the lab class. We have a small head start about this as well. Um, Everything in due time, no worries. Okay, good luck everyone. Enjoy this week's lab classes. I remember next week there are no lab classes, but there will be a theory stream. I'll put an announcement on Leho with all the details of what is expected of you. Okay. Thank you all for watching. Good luck. Uh, do we join a class on Sketchfab? Like, how does it work? Yeah, we will show more information about Sketchfab and future stuff as well. Right now, it's just uploading, and then we go in depth. Like here, you apply materials, here you apply shaders, here you add lighting, all that kind of stuff. Um, no worries. So for today, it was just a new concept. I can get it. It's a little bit hard. Um, Everything will be once you start doing it yourself, it will make a lot more sense. Okay. Good luck, everyone. See you guys. Bye.